We welcome you to another live edition of the Sports Box, brought to you by our friends at CrowdPlay. Download the free CrowdPlay app today and use the box at sign up for 10 points. And here we go.
Hey, how's everybody doing this Friday night? As always, excited to be on here again with Noah. Noah, how are you, man?
I'm pretty good, man. How about you?
Really good. I've been looking forward to this all week. Really excited to dive into some sports tonight. As always, well, actually, one thing that I do want to mention before we just dive right into our college football talk as usual is the Masters is going on this weekend. I'm not sure if we have any guys that follow the PGA Tour in here or care at all, but Tiger Woods, really good first round. Go ahead and throw this up here real quick. I want to say, David, thanks for joining. Glad to have you here, man. So yesterday was the first round of the Masters, Thursday. Play ends on Sunday. Tiger put up a really impressive first round yesterday. It's actually his first round of a Masters where he didn't have a single bogey. So despite him being old, you know, he's still having some good performances. I just wanted to throw that out there as a big Tiger Woods fan before me and Noah jump into some college football.
Yeah, I mean,
Tiger there.
Well, you know me, Garth. I'm not going to pretend I'm into golf or know anything about it. But, obviously we all know Tiger Woods is an icon. He's been through a lot. Some of it to his own doing, some of it because he's been through so many injuries. But, the fact he's this old now. Do you know how old he is? He's got to be like 44 or something like that. It's crazy.
Honestly, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd have to say right around the 40-year-old mark.
Yeah, I'd say so. So, I mean, the fact he's still, this old, he's still adding to his legacy, still getting it done. It is impressive to see, even though I don't really follow the sport. So you've got to respect that.
Yeah, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. Like a lot of people were saying today, that despite his impressive first round, golf isn't just a one-day event. It's a course of 4 days. So you got to bring your A game every day, especially at, the Masters. And actually today, the second round for the guys who started later in the day got rained out. I wasn't able to follow very closely because of work, but I believe that tropical storm and all that rain had something to do with it. I don't know. Yeah, I know you're up there in Georgia, Noah. Did you guys get a lot of rain today?
No, we haven't gotten any rain. We got some sprinkles like Wednesday, but nothing since then. It certainly wasn't like that last hurricane where we lost our power for like an entire. Some people lost it for like 3 or 4 days. We lost it for 25 hours. So, but no, it wasn't anything like that. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, David. Yes, he is 44. Look at that.
Hey, you know what? That was honestly just a complete guess. So the fact I got it right, that makes me pretty happy. I can't lie.
All right. Well, I just wanted to touch on that real quickly. As I said, I don't really know if we have anybody in here that cares too much about golf, but let's go ahead and jump right into some college football, Noah. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of games canceled this week. I believe it's up to 7 total due to COVID, and most of them being in the SEC, actually. I know your Georgia Bulldogs are off. We're down to like only 2 or 3 SEC games this weekend. I know that the commissioner of the SEC said that he doesn't feel like this threatens the season at all. He thinks that they can regroup after this week. What are your thoughts on that, Noah?
Well, I think he's right. Obviously, it's not ideal. I think I speak for everyone. Everyone is getting sick of this virus. It was nice the first couple of weeks, lockdown and everything. You don't have to go to work or whatever. But now it's just getting really old. And, the fact all these games are canceled, I'm not surprised, but obviously it's still frustrating. That said, I think he's right because I think the colleges have a lot of financial stake in these games being completed and the season going on. So unless we see like every single team just become suddenly infected with 10 or 20 players getting it, I do think they'll want to finish the season because they have a lot to gain from it finishing and a lot to lose if it doesn't. So yeah, man, obviously it sucks, no Georgia this week, Granted, last week wasn't too good either. I'm sure we'll get into that, but Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, but I do think the season will still finish because we know the NCAA, they want to make their money. So yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. And I know me and you and some of the other guys have had the conversation back towards the beginning of the season of just how important college football is to these major Division One schools. I don't know all the numbers for all the colleges out there, obviously, but I do know specifically that my Florida Gators, that like 90% of their sports profit comes from just the football program. And without having football, they physically, unless they got some sort of massive fundraising, wouldn't even be able to pay to have their other sports every season, especially at a D1 level. But yeah, you mentioned on it quickly that we're going to get into the Florida Georgia game real quick. Not that I'm not excited over a win or anything. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I would like to ask you, Noah, moving forward, what are your thoughts for your Georgia Bulldogs? What do you want to see throughout the rest of the for them?
Well, it's tough, Garth, because unfortunately our season's over. Two SEC losses isn't going to get it done. Not going to make the playoffs with that. We just, you just got to tip your cap. We got our butts killed in that game. We got off to a good start, and then we just got boat raced from there. So you got to give credit to Florida there. They came out. They were the better team. But looking at that game, I think my main takeaway is the defense was terrible, but also. Kirby, I think he's a great coach. Don't get me wrong, but I think I spoke about this last week too. I think he lacks that it factor, and what I mean by that is Stetson. He's struggling. He's not going through a good patch, and then he puts in Dewan Mathis, and I'm sure he's a good kid or anything. I don't think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he can pass the ball at all. I'm sure he's a good athlete. But you look at the stats, our quarterbacks completed 9 of 29 passes in that game. When you're completing 31% of your passes against a team like Florida, I mean, do you really expect to win? And even with that, completing 31% of our passes, defense can't stop anything. We still only lost by 16. That still is pretty big margin, but it's not like we lost by 40 or anything like that. Yeah, no, I definitely agree there. I do think they're trash this season. I think they underperformed yet again. And I think a large part of that is due to Kirby's inability to make that change, to make the gutsy call. I think Nick Saban would do it. We've seen Dabo do it when Kelly Bryant was struggling. He put in Trevor Lawrence. They've made big changes. And if I'm a guy like JT Daniels, I have to ask myself, why did I transfer here? I can't even get in the game. I was practicing with the first team, and I still can't even get a single snap when the quarterbacks are literally completing 30% of their passes. So, you asked what I want to see the rest of the season. You got to look to next year, unfortunately. It's the story of our lives, but the season's over. I'd put in either JT Daniels or Carson Beck, see what they have at the quarterback position, evaluate all four of them, see who you think is the best guy, and go with that guy going forward because, unfortunately the season is over.
Yeah, I'll say personally, from trying to be as unbiased as possible, and just some perspective on that game last weekend. What I noticed out of both quarterbacks, not just one or the other, is there were a lot of actually wide open passes, some blown coverages. I think our defense is starting to improve week in, week out, but at the same time, we're still not anywhere near where we have been. But man, did both of the quarterbacks miss some really big passes during the game. A lot of times where I was like, wow, we really lucked out on that play. If they connected, they had a touchdown or been in scoring position. So I think, obviously, like you said, the season is probably over unless the Gators somehow choke and lose 2 games, which who we have left on the schedule. I don't see that happening. But like you said, what's going on with JT? Why aren't they playing this guy? They got to give him a shot. Even if he comes in and sucks, the numbers just aren't there to not give the guy a shot. And I honestly don't have any idea of why Kirby didn't at least put him in there for a play or two.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Why would you transfer him in if you're not even going to use him? And why would you give him first team practice reps if you're not going to use him? It really doesn't make sense. And, it's like I said, I think Kirby Smart is the most idiotic genius I've ever seen because to Tactically, I think he's got everything down. I think for an actual scheme, he's pretty good. Although, our defense didn't look good. I think you guys have a great offense too. But when it comes to, basics, like, not running a fake punt against Alabama, um, sticking to your game plan, putting in a quarterback when one is clearly struggling, doesn't do any of that. And it is really frustrating. And I think you brought up a good point there. Our quarterbacks missed a lot of plays, and I think that's the difference. We were missing plays, and your offense doesn't miss plays because Kyle Trask is a very good quarterback. You guys got good skills positions, good offensive line. We just made too many mistakes, and when you're playing a team of Florida's caliber, you can't make that many mistakes. So it definitely cost us.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Noah, but looking back when you guys played the Razorbacks week 1 there, I believe that Mathis was brought in that game, and he really didn't
Mhm.
do good then either. So looking back at that, it kind of makes me question, like, hey, you already tried this where you brought in Mathis late in the game to see what he could do if he could provide us for the offense, and it didn't happen then. Why not try JT now?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When I saw him playing against Arkansas, I was like, okay, I think he's a good kid, but this guy can't play quarterback. I didn't want to see him the rest of the season. So when Stetson came out of the game and Mathis went out, I was like, oh God, this isn't going to be any better. And it wasn't. He was actually even worse than Bennett. Sure, Bennett didn't have a good game, but he was still way better than Mathis. Mathis was atrocious. I don't have the numbers up, but I think he went like 4 of 14 with 2 picks. I mean, that's not going to get it done against most teams, especially Florida. So, yeah, no, I don't understand it. JT Daniels, this isn't some unknown guy. This is a guy who was a starter at USC, a very large school in a Power 5 conference, and you transferred it in. So clearly they wanted him. Why don't they give him a chance? Why are you wasting practice reps on him if you're not even going to use him? I really don't understand it. It makes me scratch my head. You know, even Carson Beck. This is a guy who I believe, don't quote me, but I believe he was one of the best football prospects coming out of Florida that year, and he can't even get a look either. So you've got to look at it. You got to look at Kirby. I love Kirby, but you got to look at him and say he's making a lot of decisions that I can't really get behind right now.
Yeah, and moving forward, I feel like he's got to give either of the two a shot, especially if the offense, continues to not live up to expectations. You got to play him at some time. I want to go ahead and throw up Dave's comment here. He says that LSU was going to smash Bama. They got saved by COVID. I don't know if Dave's really being serious or he's just, saying that as a big LSU fan. But as we touched on real quickly, that is one of the games that got canceled due to COVID. Um, but honestly, I don't really think that LSU, that was going to be too good of a game for them. I don't think they've been that great on either side of the ball. Miles Brennan is out for the remainder of the season, Ed Orgeron said earlier this week. And as we all know, that Bama offense is unreal. It's been on par with LSU last season, and actually saw numbers earlier today where Mac Jones is either tied or slightly above Joe Burrow and where he was at through 5 games last season.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. I told you coming into the season, I thought Kyle Trask was the best quarterback in the SEC. And while I think he's shown enough to support that, I think Mac Jones is really challenging for that title right now with what he's doing. Like you said, he's literally matching or ahead of Burrow last season. I think Burrow's season last year was the best season a quarterback has ever had in all of college football's history. So, yeah, I mean, that team is just incredible, just consistent excellence. They are the standard, unfortunately. I mentioned this after we play them. We're always second best, but you got to give them their props. It's annoying as hell, but they are the standard. They are what everyone wants to be right now. And LSU had a great season last year, but the fact is they lost so much. We've gone over how much they lost. Not just Joe Burrow, all over the team, the offense, the defense. They lost a lot, and to be able to match Bama, you have to consistently be excellent. Like a team like Clemson. Other than Clemson, who's been able to do it? We've had our opportunities, we've blown them 3 times. Other than that, other than us, choking and Clemson, who's been able to compete with them consistently?
Yeah, and I will say, we talked about Joe Burrow and LSU there. It's kind of crazy to me personally to think about that last season. We're talking about how phenomenal of a season Joe Burrow had. How nobody's really done this yet, had a season quite like that. And, here we are midway through the season, and we have guys like Kyle Trask and Mac Jones who could potentially match or even beat, the numbers that he put up, which is crazy. I honestly didn't think I was going to see anybody close, at least within the next few seasons. My guy Kyle Trask at Florida is killing it. Mac Jones is killing it. With how down the SEC defenses have been this year, I wouldn't be shocked if they did end up beating his numbers. And then, whoever does is going to have all kinds of hype and draft stock, for when the draft comes around.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's unbelievable. Joe Burrow, the season he had last year, just incredible. And the fact Mac and Kyle are having such great seasons, it is very impressive to see. It makes me even more depressed that our quarterbacks can't even complete half their passes. But it is what it is. You got to give props to where it's due. I always thought Kyle Trask is a very good quarterback, and my opinion on that has been firm for a long time. And Mac too. Before the season, I saw him getting a lot of crap, and we talked about this on the show a few weeks ago. A lot of people saying he was just probably an average quarterback that Alabama would regress after Tua left, and it's been anything but. In fact, their offense is probably even better with Mac Jones than it was with Tua because he's matching what Joe Burrow did last year through 5 games, like you mentioned. So you got to tip your cap there, the figurative cap. I'm not wearing one this week, but Mac Jones is a very good quarterback.
Yeah, and I'll say, obviously, whether it was us that made it or, your Georgia Bulldogs, at the end of the season, you got to go through Bama. Personally, I'm really worried about that game. I'm not going to worry too much about it right now because we still got the rest of the season. But, man, I mean, you take a look at the offense, Mac Jones, like we said, he's, overachieving majorly. It's actually the biggest offensive line in terms of size, height, and weight that Nick Saban's ever had. Najee Harris has been probably a top 3 running back in the nation. And arguably, you got 2 guys at wide receiver who could, go in the first round of the draft. So, much like Joe Burrow, the cast around him and Nick Saban at head coach is phenomenal. So, unfortunately, I'm not looking forward to going against them. Even as being a huge Gators fan, I'm not going to bet against Alabama until they actually lose.
Yeah, no, it's obviously a game you're always going to be afraid of. I definitely was afraid when we were going to play them, and your fears are almost always confirmed because they're just that good. But no, you're right. The fact they always lose all these players to the draft. You mentioned they could potentially have 2 first-round receivers this year. Well, Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs just went in the first round last year. The fact they lose all these great players and just consistently replace them and continue is just incredible. And I agree with him right here. I think if all the Kyle Trask, Mac Jones, we've talked a lot about Zach Wilson. There's that Trey Lance guy from North Dakota State. Obviously Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields. I mean, no, it's looking.
Sam Ellinger, Sam Howell.
Yeah, I mean,
really
exactly. Exactly. Those are 2 guys I didn't even think of, and you're absolutely right. Those are 2 more really good quarterbacks. So now, yeah, obviously it's tough to project. The draft is often you can predict it to a certain extent, but it's still a bit of randomness. But I would agree that at this point, it looks like a very deep draft class for quarterbacks.
Yeah, and obviously there's a few teams in need of quarterbacks, but at the same time, this is one draft year where, at least as of right now, there isn't tons of teams that need a quarterback. So it's going to be really interesting to see, obviously probably Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence go right towards the top. Maybe somebody sneaks in there. But you could, see some of these really good quarterbacks coming out, drop to the later rounds, second, third, fourth round even. So I'm, really excited to see how that plays out. I would be really happy if, I obviously don't expect it. We have Justin Herbert, but if we could get one of those guys like really late in the draft, 4th or 5th round, just to add some depth on the roster, because hopefully come off season we get rid of Tyrod. I believe his contract comes up at the end of the season. I don't see why we'd re-sign him. But then again, if Anthony Lynn stays on the staff, then we probably will. But I'll get more into that when we actually get to the some NFL talk. But talking about quarterbacks, Noah, for me, there's something that's kind of I don't know how to feel about it exactly. Saturday night on ESPN at 7 o'clock, we play the Razorbacks and Felipe Franks, who, if you guys didn't already know, was our quarterback before he got injured last year, and Kyle Trask took over and kind of took the nation by storm. He's had a very contentious relationship with the Florida fans. He's gotten a lot of love and he's gotten a lot of hate. Obviously, he knows the system, having been there for 3 years. And there's going to be probably a big chip on his shoulder to come in there and look and say, hey guys, you passed up on me bringing in Trask as the starter. I got something to prove to you guys. What kind of performance, now, realistically, do you see out of Franks tomorrow night?
Well, I think you'll see a good performance from him. Felipe Franks on the year has 14 touchdowns and 3 picks, 1,400 yards, 17.9 quarterback rating. So, for context, he's 17th in touchdowns, 44th in QBR, 24th in yards. So, I do think he's a respectable quarterback. Obviously, like you mentioned, he longtime Florida Gator. I think he was on some pretty below average teams, to be honest with you, at least for your standard. I think that said, I think he was part of that because, like you mentioned, when Kyle Trask came into that team, it completely changed. You guys were actually a serious threat offensively, and that's shown this year. So I do think he's a good quarterback. I think you can expect to see him have a good game because, like you mentioned, your defense. Well, I think it has improved a little bit. If we had halfway decent quarterback play in that game, I do think we would have put up more points, and we still put up 28. So I do think you'll see him have a good game, but he's going to have a tough time because Kyle Trask, his replacement, is doing very well. I think he's got a lot of guts. I think he's been through a lot, like you mentioned, from his own fans, from the play on the field. I think he's taken a lot of punishment, and I think he might take some more because I do know you guys have a good defensive line. So I would think he'd have a good game. But obviously, I'd still pick you guys in that one.
Yeah, I have two, potential upset alert trap games on my schedule for this week. One of them being us playing Arkansas. As we've seen, they played your Georgia Bulldogs tough. Granted, that was week 1, first game of the season, but also they played Auburn very tough. Actually, it's due to a blown call, which the SEC came out and said, "Hey, we did miss this one." It was on that intentional spike by Bo Nix that ended up actually being a fumble. And a turnover on downs. But, I could definitely see them coming in and being very competitive, playing us very tough. I think that they're a scrappy team who makes up for their lack of talent in the SEC when they're on and everybody's kind of gelling and playing up to the best of their ability. They're a team that's a potential upset for anybody in the SEC. So we got to take care of business. We can't, linger on beating Georgia. We still got a whole season ahead of us. We got to get it done. I either see this being, a 2 or 3 score win by us or coming right down to the wire. Now, the other game that I have on my upset alert is actually Notre Dame at Boston College. Probably people haven't been following them too closely, which I don't blame them. Boston College isn't known for being a perennial powerhouse or anything. They're known for being one of the teams that kind of get plowed through in the ACC. But, man, have they been much improved this year. Their offense is really good. They played Clemson right to the wire. They are the home team this week, even though, there's not really a home field advantage as much as past seasons. And ND coming off that win against Clemson, much like the Gators, do they come out and take care of business, or do they kind of have a hangover from winning that game? So that's one other game that, I'm going to tell all the college football fans to pay attention to this weekend.
Well, I think you brought up 2 good games there. I do think Arkansas will play you guys well because, like you mentioned, they're a good team. They played well with us for a half before I thought we made coaching adjustments, and then the second half I thought we pulled away. And like you mentioned, that call in the Auburn game was absolutely atrocious. They got completely robbed, and I'm not a fan of saying that a team just straight got robbed because of a call because I think there's a lot that goes into a game. But the simple fact is, if that call is made correctly, they win that game. And the fact that it wasn't allowed Auburn to win the game, I think they got completely bailed out there, and it was a joke. So, no, I definitely agree that they are a good team, and they could beat you guys. Um, I just don't see it because your offense is so freaking good. And yeah, and the other game, Notre Dame and Boston College. I got to give a lot of credit to Notre Dame. I know we've talked a lot in the past about Notre Dame, just kind of basically joking about them and how much they always choke. And I kind of expected them to lose that game against Clemson, and they didn't. And I know people say that Trevor Lawrence wasn't playing, but it's not like the backup. DJ, he still played well. And when Notre Dame went up in that game and they lost the lead, I kind of look at it like, okay, past Notre Dame games probably would have folded right there and lost it. And they didn't. They went into overtime against the number one team in the nation at the time, and they got it done. They won the game. So you got to give them a lot of props. Hopefully, that's a sign that they're finally a different team. I'm still not sold on Brian Kelly. This is his first really big win ever, but I was happy to see that because it shakes things up. Now, like you mentioned, Boston College, they're no slouch. They were up on Clemson in that game, and it took a big comeback for Clemson to beat them. So I do think they're a good team. They're a team that, while I think they're never in contention for anything seriously, they always have some pretty good players. AJ Dillon, that running back they used to have, was an absolute beast. Luke Kuechly came from Boston College. You know who else came from Boston College, Garth?
I don't honestly know. You have to enlighten me here.
A quarterback that wears number 2 in a red jersey.
Number 2 in a red jersey.
You're
I
killing. You're killing me, man.
Matt Ryan.
Yeah, Matt Ryan came from Boston College
Really?
too. Yeah, he did.
That's actually something that I didn't know.
Yeah, he was born in Pennsylvania, but he actually went to Boston College. So yeah, but they always have some good players. So I would expect it to be a good game. And maybe Notre Dame coming off that big game against Clemson, maybe you could say that they'll be a little bit overconfident or something like that. But I would probably still pick Notre Dame. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Boston College won because, like you said, they're a good team. But just going off of what I can predict right now, I would pick the favorites in both of those games.
And one thing that I wanted to point out tonight is, as we said, Notre Dame beat Clemson last week. Big time win for them. Brian Kelly finally gets a big time win, his first against the AP top 5 team. However, that win really doesn't do too much for their season other than give them the ACC lead currently, because they're still going to have to face off with Clemson for the ACC championship should they both win out, which is very likely. And they're going to face Clemson with a Trevor Lawrence. So, Clemson's going to get another shot at them, and it's tough enough to beat them once, let alone twice. I don't know. We're just going to have to see what happens there with that one.
Yeah, no, you make a good point, and I think you've just made a point for what is probably my biggest criticism of the 14 playoff, because a team like Notre Dame can beat Clemson in the regular season. But what if they lose in the SEC or the the ACC championship game, and let's say it's not very close? Does a team that beat Clemson and only has one loss drop out of the playoffs? This is something I thought about with LSU last year. They beat Alabama. What if they had to play Alabama again in the SEC championship game? Was there any chance of them dropping out of the playoffs? Maybe not. Maybe they would still make it if Notre Dame only had one loss to Clemson. Maybe they'd still make it. I can't say for sure. But the fact I even have to think about it, I think isn't a good sign for the 14 playoff. At least expand it to 8. I don't think 4 is enough. I like that it's so exclusive, but I also think it displays a lot of flaws.
Yeah, and I can definitely agree there. I think really that the biggest flaw you have with just the 4-team format is the conference championship games. You can go undefeated all year, play a very good opponent in your conference championship game, lose by a narrow margin, and then get beat out by an undefeated team who didn't really play anybody worthwhile in their conference championship game. Probably somebody that they beat quite handily, kind of like Clemson in the past seasons. although that conference is toughening up, as we've mentioned, over the past couple of weeks. But yeah, I could fully get behind an 8-team format. And what you touched on with LSU, how they played Alabama again, in the SEC championship game. That's kind of how I feel with my Florida Gators now. Is hey, look, ultimately our goal is to make playoffs, but we got to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. We can't just go in there and lose and expect to make it. And I know a lot of people put a lot of weight behind the SEC schedule because they're a perennial powerhouse. They produce teams like Bama and last year's LSU, but from a completely unbiased standpoint, I couldn't put a 2-loss SEC team in over like an undefeated Power 5 team who won their conference championship.
It's a very difficult conversation, and it actually brings me to my next point. Last week we talked about BYU and whether they could make the playoffs, and we got to give them credit. Both of us picked Boise State in that game. They didn't just beat Boise State; they absolutely blew the doors off of them. So, got to give them credit there. We'll see how they factor into the playoff race. If it was an 18 playoff, I think a team like BYU would make it easily. And we hate the fans, but UCF fans, they did bring up a point. You can go undefeated in a Power 5 conference and not even come close to the playoffs. A 1 or 2 loss Power 5 team could potentially make it in over you. And I don't think that's right, personally.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how that plays out. Like we said, we did both pick Boise State, but we also said that if BYU had any shot at making playoffs, they were going to have to make this a statement game. They couldn't just go in there and narrowly win. They needed to really beat the brakes off of Boise State, which they did.
Yeah.
8 wins out this season, and ends up pretty high in the polls. That's going to be a huge boost for them. Whether or not that gets them in the playoffs, I don't know. I think it's still going to take a lot of help. I think that they need something like Alabama to beat Florida pretty handedly, have Florida be a 2-loss team and not have a second SEC team in there. Potentially you could have like Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, and maybe BYU. But like you said, it's pretty tough for a team like BYU or UCF to even make it in despite having an undefeated season. And that's why I'm a big proponent of expanding the playoffs, like you said, to something like an 8-team format to give those guys a shot. I don't think that they should just be guaranteed it or anything like that. But hey, if they have a hell of a season, give them a shot.
Yeah, and it actually reminds me of something, speaking about BYU making the playoffs and Boise State. A lot of people will say, oh, they haven't played anybody. They shouldn't make the playoffs. If they played a real team, they'd get beat. And to a certain extent, I can understand that. But it's kind of funny that we mentioned Boise State because Boise State had one of the greatest wins that college football has ever seen when they beat Oklahoma in that Fiesta Bowl in that absolute thriller. So you've got to question, could we see something like that again if a team like a BYU could get in the playoffs? You'll never know. And I understand that argument, but the fact is we don't know what they can do because we're never going to be able to see it in this current format. I don't think so.
Yeah, and Skylar commenting here that, with expanding the brackets, it makes certain games meaningless. If you look at the past season for the top 8 teams, the other 4 are not the best. I think it sucks to go undefeated and not make it, but it is about the best 4 teams. That being said, I think it's tough. I understand wanting to expand. And, I completely agree with that. Like I said, I would never want to do something, 16 teams. Anybody should be thrown in there. There's really a fine line and a fine balance there. I think that, 8 might be just enough. I feel like you definitely shouldn't include anyone outside of the top 10. That I feel really strongly about. I'd definitely like to see a non-Power 5 get in there, even if they got massacred, because we've seen Power 5s get in there and get massacred. I mean, look at Michigan State. They're one team that I can think of right off the top of my head. They got in there and got absolutely lit up and didn't look like they belonged, but, they were Power 5, so they got in there. I think that everybody has their own take to it, their own opinion to it. But, I wouldn't be opposed to an 8-team format.
Yeah, I think he makes a valid point there. That is the argument. The fact it's so exclusive and it makes every game so meaningful. does mean something. What I would say to that, and Garth, you brought up a good point to kind of support this. Um, if the four best teams, the top four, are way better than everybody else, then I don't think expanding would make a big difference anyway. Because if they truly are the best teams, they'd win those games anyway. It at least gives those 5 to 8 teams a chance to compete. But if those top four are still the best teams, it's going to show anyway. In my opinion, and we've seen these Power Five teams that have great records get in and not be able to compete. You mentioned Michigan State. I believe they got blown out by Ohio State that year, if I remember correctly. And I remember Washington getting in one time, and they played Alabama. And I think they played it okay for about a quarter, and then I think they lost like 28-7 in that game. So, make no mistake, these non-competitive games, they still happen in a 14 playoff. They still happen in Power 5 teams. I don't think it's something that is exclusive to conferences that aren't in the Power 5.
And I want to go ahead and put this up here real quick. Tyler says that he agrees and disagrees. You need to schedule and beat quality teams. They gave Notre Dame a shot, and most year their toughest game is Navy. Then Bama killed them. One thing that I do want to point out for the viewers tonight that I personally only really got a glimpse of and gained some insight to over the past couple of seasons, where I've really followed scheduling and recruiting really closely, is that keep in mind with these non-Power 5 schools, for most of them, the case isn't that they don't want to play these top tier blue-blooded Power 5 conference teams. It's the circumstances that come along with it. A lot of times, I know Florida does this, Alabama does this, a lot of big schools, what they look for if you want to be on their schedule is they're saying, hey, look, you're going to get yourself on ESPN, you're going to get a lot of exposure playing us, so we got to get some kind of benefit out of it. A lot of time they want to do a 2-for-1 where you're getting one home game versus 2 away games. And a lot of times they actually require you to physically pay them just to play them. Like we saw last year when Tennessee lost, I believe it was Georgia Southern. They had to pay Tennessee like $300,000 just to play them. So, try and keep that in the back of your mind, guys, that, hey, these non-Power 5 schools aren't just running away scared. Sometimes it's what comes with it to even get these games on the schedule.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point as well. These Power 5 teams, they do have to concede a bit the other 5 conferences. They have to concede to play these Power 5 teams. And sometimes they even have to pay. Now, I think that's more common with FCS teams. I'm pretty sure, but like you mentioned, it does happen with some lower Division I teams as well. But no, I understand that from Tyler. You do have to play quality teams to get in. It still kind of concerns me that a team like Notre Dame might possibly have to beat Clemson twice to make the playoffs. Because if both of them have 1 losses, Clemson is going to get in over Notre Dame. That's just how it's going to go. Even if both the games are dead even and they're both, next, very close to each other in quality, the committee will choose Clemson. It won't even be a debate. So if Notre Dame has 1 loss and doesn't make it in, I think that's a disgrace.
Yeah, and as we said, Notre Dame's still going to have to play Clemson. And like Noah said, I probably got to agree there. If Clemson ends up winning that game, even if it's, time expiring, last play of the game, and it's by like 1 or 2 points, Notre Dame probably doesn't get in as a 2-loss team. So far, I believe that only the SEC has had a 2-loss team get in. Or, sorry, rather a 1-loss team that wasn't a conference champion.
Alabama. Yeah, they got in over Ohio State that year, and they won the championship.
And I do remember that year actually specifically because, there was a lot of controversy there, whether it should be Alabama or Ohio State. But yeah, we never really know for sure with this 4-team format. All we know for sure is that there's most likely going to be 4 Power 5. And right now, looking at it, I've got to say it's going to be the winner of Bama and Florida, and most likely Ohio State out of the Big Ten, and either Clemson or Notre Dame. And then the 4th, I right now I can't say because I don't know if they put an undefeated non-Power 5 team in, or if they give one of those 1 or 2 loss 5 champions a shot.
And Garth, as we're talking about this, and you listen to teams there, I just thought of something else that works against a team like BYU. What if a team like Oregon goes undefeated and they probably don't really play anyone that great either? That's another thing. Let's make no mistake. This not playing anybody thing doesn't just apply to non-Power 5 conferences. It's been the biggest criticism of Alabama for years that they don't play anybody in the regular season. And then when they actually play somebody, they're all rested up. Now, I don't completely agree with it. I think that's taken away from a lot of their success. But it has been brought up for. So if a team like Oregon goes, what is it, like 7-0? Isn't their conference only 7 games?
Yeah, I believe they're 7-game only, and they still do have a conference championship game, I believe.
Yeah, so if a 7 or 8-0 Oregon team, I think that team would get in over an undefeated BYU as well.
Yeah, and that's actually something really interesting that you point out there, because top to bottom, that is a very weak division this season. USC is nowhere near what it's been in the past. It's not even close, and they've been that way for a few seasons now. UCLA, they're nothing like they've been in the past. Stanford is not like they were with McCaffrey, Andrew Luck. Would they make it in? Possibly, yeah. I see how it's very hard to go against them if they go undefeated and win, the conference championship. But this whole argument of, this team doesn't really play anybody good. Yeah, you got to take it into account, but at the same time, you can't let that be, the end all be all and be the determining factor for whether a team gets in or not.
Yeah, obviously, quality wins, they absolutely are probably the biggest factor. But a lot of these big teams, like you mentioned, they play a lot of crappy teams. Oregon, I love Oregon. Stanford, I think they've regressed a lot. Ever since, they had great players like McCaffrey, Bryce Love, but ever since then, I think they've gone downhill a bit. I still think David Shaw is a really good coach. But the Pac-12 has just regressed. It used to be pretty good when, like you mentioned, Stanford was good. Washington had a really good run for a few years. But the days of it being this, a high and mighty conference with, powerhouses like USC, one of the greatest dynasties we've ever seen. When Oregon had Chip Kelly and they were basically unstoppable in offense when they weren't playing someone named Auburn. It was a very exciting conference, very competitive. Unfortunately, I don't see that anymore, and it's disappointing because I think when the Pac-12 is good, the college football is way better.
Yeah, most definitely. I don't know if I really see that conference changing too much in the near future. I feel like there's a lot of needs for all of those teams mentioned, other than maybe Oregon, but also at the same time, I don't even think that Oregon's really at the level that they were at, like you said, when they did have Chip Kelly. We just got to see that conference improve. I don't know if anybody even makes it in from that conference this season. I think it's going to take something like an undefeated Oregon who wins their championship game. I don't know, man. I think it's going to be tough for that 4th spot, no matter who you are.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely not for certain, but would an undefeated Oregon get over a one-loss Notre Dame? I don't know. But that I couldn't agree with that, even though I really love Oregon, because like you mentioned, the Pac-12, it has gone downhill. They're probably not really going to play anybody that's that good. So, we'll see. It's interesting. It's also really tough for me with the Pac-12 because like they only play 7 games compared to these teams that are these conferences that play more. So, it's kind of weird for me to compare that. I'm not really sure how to feel about that as well.
Yeah, it's COVID has really messed with the scheduling this season. And how do you weigh a 7-0 team versus, like a 10-0 team? That lack of ace games is going to make it really interesting. There's probably going to be some major controversy come time they choose the Final Four teams. There's going to be people mad. There's going to be people happy with it. You can't please everybody. But before me and Noah shift gears here, and jump into some NFL. I have been neglecting it the past few weeks. I want to take the time to give a shout out to Crowd Play. As you guys can see, they're a really big part of every week's show, as well as all the other shows on the Sports Box. You guys can find them on the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. Don't forget to use code THEBOX for 10% off. And to take a quick break here before we jump into the NFL talk, I'm going to go ahead and throw up this ad for you guys. All right, guys, we're back after a short break there. Honestly, ever since last night, I've been so excited to get in some NFL talk here tonight. If you guys somehow missed it, I'll go ahead and I got a few things here to throw up, so bear with me. My guy, Phillip Rivers, not only had a phenomenal game last night, in my opinion, despite only having one touchdown. He actually went ahead and surpassed Dan Marino for 5th all-time in the passing yards department. He's actually closing in on him for 5th all-time in passing touchdowns as well. But yeah, definitely really excited, really rooting hard for Phillip Rivers, as I've said multiple times on the show, despite no longer being on the Chargers. And what a moment for him, What were some of your takeaways from that game last night, with the Titans?
Well, first of all, you got to give props to Phillip Rivers. That is a massive milestone to reach. A guy like Dan Marino, he's constantly mentioned as a guy who was way ahead of his time, considering the fact he passed for 61,000 yards and over 400 touchdowns in a league where passing wasn't as valued as it is today. And he had a 5,000-yard season in that era as well. So the fact Phillip Rivers, sure, he's in a much more passer-friendly era, but still, to pass Dan Marino for 5th all-time on the passing yards list. We mentioned this a lot, but I'll be honest with you, I don't know how people can't think Phillip Rivers is a Hall of Famer, considering he's going to retire top 5 in yards, potentially top 5 in touchdowns as well. What's keeping him out? The fact he doesn't have a Super Bowl. Dan Marino doesn't either, and he's in the Hall of Fame. Phillip Rivers has made 8 Pro Bowls. It's not like he's just gotten these numbers from being crap for 20 or 30 years. So yeah, big milestone. But the Colts, I thought they looked really great last night. And Hall of Famer. I agree with David. The Colts, I believe Rivers, he passed for 300 yards last night. I didn't see him take a lot of risks. I thought he was taking a lot of short passes, and I posted about this in Sport Life. That's fine. I don't understand why people try to criticize that. A guy throwing for these short routes underneath that have a low chance of failure in turnovers. That's what a quarterback's supposed to do. You're supposed to make the right read. Why would you chuck it downfield 20 or 30 yards, and potentially risk a turnover? And we mentioned this as well with the Colts. I don't think they have that true receiving threat. They don't have that true receiving threat because T.Y. Hilton has regressed, and other guys like Zach Pascal, Mo Alley Cox. We went over the names a few weeks ago. I honestly thought it was kind of embarrassing, reading over those names. So, yeah, I mean, big ups to Phillip Rivers. He will make the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. He had a good game last night. And the Colts, who a lot of people, excluding the two of us because we did, a lot of people didn't give them a chance. Now they're first in the AFC South. So, big props to them and Phillip Rivers.
Yeah, and I had 2 major takeaways from last night's game. I did only watch the first half. I ended up falling asleep, but I did catch the second half this morning. One is that the Colts defense is phenomenal. DeForest Buckner is really a huge presence on that defensive line, which is good top to bottom. not a lot of big time or household names, but man, do they get it done in the trenches. And just, how fast this team gets to the ball, sideline to sideline speed. And it seems like they're just out there to, punch the other team in the mouth. They want to take the fight to you. They don't want you to be pushing them up and down the field. They want to force turnovers. They want to get pressure on the quarterback, and they're just flying around having a good time hitting people hard. Um, and the other thing, my other really big takeaway from that game last night is I think that despite how good Ryan Tannehill has been, don't get me wrong, major props to Ryan Tannehill, completely turned his career around. You look at the numbers since he took over last season there. They've been on par with some of the best in the league. But that offense, when Derrick Henry's either having a bad game or he's not on the field because he's out, getting a breather, is not, a very good offense. They're not the same team. I feel like they're very, very one-dimensional because they're so reliant on Derrick Henry being a really, big presence in games and setting up the play action pass.
Yeah, absolutely. That is their offense. And, we talked about Ryan Tannehill. I think he doesn't get the respect he deserves because Henry is the offense, and no one will debate that because he is. Their offense is built around running the rock, and then Tannehill, he greatly benefits from the play action off of it. Now, of course, every quarterback would, so you've got to point that out. But no, I agree. If they shut down Henry, it will definitely impact their offense. You could say that for a lot of offenses, but Henry is one of the best runners in the NFL, if not the best. Um, Now, I think the best running back this year has been Alvin Kamara. But as a pure runner, I would probably say Henry is still the best. So to shut him down is very impressive. You got to give credit to the Colts defense there. Like you mentioned, DeForest Buckner, I think he's a beast. He always has been. Darius Leonard, freaking first team All Pro as a rookie. This guy's an absolute stud, tackling machine, man. He doesn't miss tackles. And I think a guy a lot of people haven't mentioned who came over to them in the offseason, Xavier Rhodes. Xavier Rhodes, and I don't think he's the guy he used to be when he was on Minnesota, when he was an absolute shutdown. I literally saw him shut down Julio Jones in a game, which is not easy to do, but I still think he's a serviceable quarterback. He's got 2 picks this year, a pick 6, 10 pass deflections in 9 games. His career high is 18, and he usually averages 10 or 11, so he's contributing. I don't think he, obviously, like I said, I don't think he's elite anymore, but he's still a good corner. I think he adds a solid element to that secondary to where you can say, okay, at every level they have a guy that can make that play when you need it. And, to be honest, that game last night, for a large part of it, it wasn't really close. So, the Colts got to give them big respect. They are a good team. And like I mentioned a few times, I think they just, they needed to put it together. I thought they had a good team last year. Unfortunately, luck retiring, I think it threw the wrench in because I like Jacoby Brissett. I don't think he's really a good starter in the league. I think he's more suited as a backup. You get a guy like Philip Rivers, and he's not that guy anymore. He makes some mistakes. He's hot and cold. But he gives you that edge. He has that fire in him, as we've talked about. So I think adding him has kind of motivated the team in a way, and I think you've seen that because they're playing hard. The defense is really good. Naheem Hines, I think you mentioned him last week. I think he's playing very well right now.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, Noah. He is one player that, as weeks go on, I'm starting to fall in love with that guy. He reminds me a lot of Darren Sproles. Honestly, he's a smaller statued guy. He's incredibly elusive, fast in and out of cuts. He's just really fun to watch out there.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a great comparison. He's not a guy that's going to get all these rushes, but he makes so much of an impact out of the backfield that he can just change a game. I don't know. He's only 5'9". I think Sproles was even smaller. So, maybe he's not as good as Darren Sproles, but I do agree he's probably that similar type of player to where, he can get these limited touches. But with the touches he does get, he makes a big impact. And, Marlon Mack, obviously it sucks that he's out for the season with that injury. But Hines has really picked up the load. I believe he scored 2 touchdowns last night, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I want to say him and the rookie there, Jonathan Taylor, have been a heck of a 1-2 punch, especially with Marlon Mack being out, like you said. Hines brings you more of that, open space, receiving running back. a guy that, you want to get him 5 or 10 yards down the field and just let him loose. And Taylor is more of that physical in between the tackle presence. There were a few plays last night where I saw him lower his shoulder and absolutely run people over, which he was a guy that I really liked coming out of college. So I'm glad to see him doing well. To backtrack, Noah, one guy that you mentioned, and I'm glad that you brought him up, is Xavier Rhodes. Last night, and this is a guy who's been on fire. He was actually on a streak of, I believe it was like 4 or 5 games where he had at least one touchdown. AJ Brown, man, he played him one-on-one pretty much the entire game. One catch for 21 yards and no touchdowns. I mean, that's, as good of a performance as you could ask of your DB1. So, huge props to him. He went down early in the game with a stinger, thankfully came back. He was a huge part of the Colts win. And also backtracking a little bit here, one thing that I want to touch on is looking at Derrick Henry's stats so far through the season and looking at specific games here. Last night he had 19 carries for 103 yards. And obviously the Titans lost pretty handily, especially in the second half. Against the Bears, he only had 68 rushing yards on 21 attempts, which they barely got through that game. If it wasn't for the Bears not having, a pretty pitiful offense, they probably would have won that game. Against the Steelers, he only had 75 yards. So, you take a look down through the schedule, you look at the numbers, they can win without Henry having a great performance, but at the same time, when you can really limit Derrick Henry, your chances to beat the Titans are really, really good. And I think that, moving forward on the season, if you got the Titans on your schedule, you got to look at, hey, we got to make Ryan Tannehill throw the ball. Dave threw up a stat here for us. He blames play calling. Not a receiver with over 2 catches until the middle of the fourth quarter is ridiculous. And absolutely, man. How is that even possible in today's NFL league? And I think, it probably is due to some play calling, but also I think that, my take with Ryan Tannehill is off the play action. He's one of the best in the league. But when Derrick Henry's not out there and he's just got to sit in the pocket and progress and make reads, he isn't the same guy. And I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, David makes a good point there. I think it is a bit of all of that. I agree the play calling isn't good. The fact that their receivers didn't have that 2 catches until the fourth quarter, completely unacceptable for an offense in today's climate. Especially with how pass heavy it is, this is completely unacceptable. I would agree that you'd like to see Ryan Tannehill do better. That said, you brought up the stats. Derrick Henry still had 103 yards, but for Derrick Henry standards, that isn't. This is a guy that can rush for over 200 easily, that can break off a 90-yard run, running over 3 defenders like he did against the Jags last season. So it's still a very good standard, or still a very good game. But for his talent, you take that all day. And yeah, AJ Brown. I mean, he's a very good receiver. Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill. You'd expect their offense to do better, and the Colts defense deserves a lot of credit. I think they've gotten a lot of disrespect. Like they haven't been the number 1 ranked defense in the NFL for several weeks. So they deserve a lot of big props. But yeah, if you're a Titans fan, you got to look at it and go, okay, that was pretty bad. The Colts are a good team. It's going to be a tough fight. But the fact we didn't even compete for large parts of the game is very concerning.
Yeah, and another guy, I'm looking through the roster here. Another guy on that defense that at least last night looked really phenomenal was Justin Houston. They play DeForest Buckner and Justin Houston side by side, and man, are those guys a problem for offensive lines. The Titans have one of the better offensive lines in the NFL, which helps out Derrick Henry a lot, and they, put it to them most of the game. So, I want to go ahead and throw something up here real quick. I went ahead and got the Colts schedule because I want to take a look at them moving forward this season. As we said, they beat the Titans last night. They have a short week, short turnaround. They play Green Bay at home this weekend, which is going to be a very tough game. And then they got the Titans again the following week. Texans, Raiders, Texans, Steelers. So, there are some easier games thrown in there after this next stretch. Texans twice. As we know, they're not very good. Raiders, very tough team. I know they're a team that you've liked so far this season. And then obviously the Steelers, they speak for themselves. My takeaway with the schedule is it's not going to be easy, but if you can come out and win, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games. If you can win like 4 or 5 out of those 7, you're a team that come playoffs, you're going to be battle tested. You're going to be proven, and I think you're going to see a lot more hype and respect for this Colts team if they can go on a run here to finish off the season.
Yeah, I agree. It's not obviously going to be easy. Could you actually put that schedule up again?
Yeah, I can throw that up here.
All right, cool. So yeah, looking at this, they're 6-3 right now. So I'd say for a playoff team right now with 7 teams, I think even 9 wins could get it done. 10 has usually been the benchmark. But Green Bay, the tough games, obviously Green Bay, they're gonna have to play Tennessee again. Pittsburgh, and like you mentioned, I do like the Raiders team. I think they are very good. They've been a bit overlooked. I brought this up yesterday, actually, in our Sport Life admin chat, that the Oakland Raiders had the highest strength of victory in the entire NFL because they've beaten teams like the Saints, the Chiefs, and the Browns. The Browns are 5-3, I believe, as well. So they've beaten a lot of really good teams. So they're going to need about 3 or 4 wins, I'd say. I think the Texans, they can sweep the Texans because, like you mentioned, the Texans aren't very good. I think they've gotten a little better since they fired Bill O'Brien because Bill O'Brien sucks. But they're still not a very good team. Tennessee, I don't know if I see the Colts sweeping Tennessee, but it could always happen. I didn't see Tampa sweeping New Orleans, and they got their butts kicked. And then, the Jags, they suck as well. So basically it comes down to Green Bay, Oakland, and Pittsburgh. They got to win, I'd say, 1 or 2 of those games. They can't lose all of them, obviously. It's going to be very interesting. You're going to see that defense that we've praised a lot get tested. It's going to be very interesting. I hope they make it. I do think they will make it. They've gotten off to such a good start that I don't think they're going to lose, go on a massive losing streak or anything like that. But it's going to be very interesting. Absolutely.
Yeah, and as most people say in the NFL, that no games are guaranteed. You can get upset every week, regardless of the team's record you're playing. You got to bring your A game. But I got to say that definitely, you got to sweep the Texans. I can see it happening, and Jaguars are abysmal. So they're right there is 3 not guaranteed but very likely wins. That puts you at 9 wins. So there's already 9-7, even if you lose all those other games. And say you just beat 1 of those 4, better opponents on your schedule, that's 10-6. 2, you're looking at 11-5. And if one of those games happens to be the Titans, there's probably the division, and I would say second or third. I don't know if 11-5 is going to get the first seed in the NFC, especially with how teams like the Seahawks have been playing. But definitely second or third seed if you can finish 10-6 or 11-5. As far as this coming Sunday with Green Bay, I will say that with the year that Aaron Rodgers has had, on the same hand, it seems like, and I actually talked about this earlier today with one of my really good friends who's a diehard Packers fan, that it seems like Rodgers almost has to have a perfect week or a perfect game, rather, to win or be in it at the end of the game, especially against quality opponents. The defense, isn't there. I don't know their defensive ranking. I'm sure, you're pretty good at pulling that stuff up, Noah. The defense isn't there. Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams kind of been in and out of the lineup this year. They don't have a top tier tight end, So, for defense is good, the Colts, it's probably going to be fairly easy for them to slow down. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised if the Colts at home can beat Green Bay, even with the short turnaround. So, 10-6, 11-5, that's going to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. That would absolutely get it done. And you bring up a good point there with the Packers. I actually agree with it. I think this has been their problem for a long time. Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen, probably the most talented quarterback ever. I think you've seen a lot of times where he has to have those perfect games for them to compete. Because when he doesn't, we can think of the examples. Who dat, very good team. But talking about the Packers, last year against San Francisco, when we played them when we went to the Super Bowl, when they went 15-1 and played the Giants, when they play these good teams and their team has an off game, sometimes they lose and they don't just lose, it's bad. So, I think that is a good point. And, I'm glad you brought it up, Garth, because, I pulled up those stats as soon as you said that. Green Bay, ninth highest yards per play allowed. They're giving up 6 yards per play. The only teams worse, you're talking about teams like the Jets, the Texans. The Seahawks have been criticized a lot for their defense as well. The Bengals, Jags, Falcons. You're talking teams like that. The only ones worse than them. The only good teams I see that are worse than them are the Raiders and the Seahawks. So, yeah, that defense is not good. That's going to be a big opportunity for Indy. And, you got to give some fairness. Predicting divisional games is not easy. Those are always really tough games. That said, I do think they can still sweep the Texans. And we got to remember, they actually lost week 1 to the Jags. So, they're going to be kind of fired up about that week 17. They're not going to want to get swept by the crappy Jags. And, part of me wants to think that they're going to be a little extra motivated, not just because, they've kind of been getting overlooked and such. But this is Phillip Rivers, man. You got to play for your quarterback. You got to play for your guy who's gone this long in the league and hasn't won a Super Bowl. So, I got to think, he's probably very popular in the locker room because we all know his personality. You hate playing against him. You love playing for him. I expect they're going to be wanting to play for him and win him a Super Bowl before he retires. Because if Phillip Rivers won a Super Bowl, any slim argument against him being a Hall of Famer would disappear like that. So, it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and I pulled up the Packers schedule here. I was actually mistaken. The Colts are off this weekend. The Packers play the Jaguars, and then they travel to face the Colts. So, that probably definitely helps the Colts out a lot. They're not going to have a short turnaround. They get to go back and practice on their own field. But looking at the Packers' schedule thus far this season, I don't really see a team on their schedule that jumps out that has a very good defense other than the Bucs, and the Bucs beat them handily. Aaron Rodgers looked awful. They couldn't really get anything going at all at any point in that game. So potentially I could see them struggling with the Colts. Really the only thing going against the Colts is, what are they going to bring on the offensive side of the ball? Phillip Rivers has had a very up and down season so far. I don't think that he's played elite. I don't think that he's played, abysmal and game. But I think he's played pretty good, and I think that he's played, right around bad, not so great. But the other thing that I will mention, and I said this earlier today on a post, is, and I don't have the exact numbers without looking it up, but Phillip Rivers overall in his career in the month of November is unreal. Every season, come towards the end of the season, once we get into the winter months, weather starts to change. Phillip Rivers just, for whatever reason, there's a switch in him that flips, and, he just has these huge performances where he looks really, really good out there and can win some games no matter who he's playing. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how that plays out, with him specifically. But yeah, Colts, it's looking pretty good for them moving forward. You get to that 10-6, get to that 11-5, win one or two of those tough games. You're in full control of that division right now with having won that game last night.
Yeah, I agree. I think they have a very solid team foundation. The support we've been getting is just great, and we're improving every week. I agree. So, to hear that is really awesome. This is a lot of fun to do, especially with my man Garth. It's a lot of fun. And once we get on PS5, both of us, we're going to be having these conversations a lot off camera as well, which I really look forward to. But yeah, I mean, the Colts, very good team. They have a nice foundation. Like you mentioned, I think Phillip Rivers, he's not that guy anymore, that can carry, a team like the Chargers that is not very good, that has terrible ownership, terrible coaches like Norv Turner, Mike McCoy, just not very good coaches. I don't think he's that guy anymore. He's hot and cold, like I mentioned before. But when he's hot, he can still have these games. He had 300 yards last game. And I believe a week or two ago, he was nominated for NFL Air Player of the Year.
Yeah, when he played the Bengals, and I forget the exact stats, but he had a hell of a game to lead that.
Yeah, whatever whatever the hell they call it, the air and ground players of the week. He was the air player. So, yeah, you can still have those types of games. And like you mentioned, my guy, Justin Houston, went to Georgia. He's not that elite pass rusher anymore who almost broke the sack record, but he's a guy that he's used on limited snaps, he can still make an impact. So, yeah, I think they had a very solid foundation that they started to build on. And I think there's one guy that really changed that. Do you know who I'm thinking of?
As in terms of a player or as a coach?
Yeah, well, Frank Reich did change it, but I was thinking of a player.
I don't really have any guesses, honestly. I mean, obviously Philip Rivers has an impact on the team, but I don't think he's the complete reason.
I think that the Colts started to change when they drafted Quentin Nelson, because the big criticism of the Colts under Andrew Luck's time was that, yes, he's a very good quarterback. T.Y. Hilton was a very good receiver. They had the skills positions, but their offensive line was absolutely atrocious. When they drafted Quentin Nelson, a guy I think most would agree is probably the best guard. If he's not the best guard, he's right there. And you can even make an argument he could be probably the best lineman in the NFL overall. Guy's an absolute stud, first team All Pro. He gives your offensive line a foundation. And as soon as they drafted him, what do you know? The Colts became a playoff team. Andrew Luck put up probably his best career year ever. Unfortunately, retired after that, but it was probably his best year ever. You can have all the skills positions, you can have the quarterback, but ask a guy like Matthew Stafford. If you don't have the team around you, you don't have the offensive line, you're not going to do anything. And the fact they've revamped the offensive line, they've revamped the defense. Quentin Nelson and Darius Leonard were rookies, and they were both first team All Pros. You can't understate how much that changes your team's dynamic. And now they have a winning culture in place to where they have an off season, but then they make changes to bring in Philip Rivers, and they're good again. They're a very good team. And I think that's down to the culture. Frank Reich, I think he's incredible. Obviously, he was the guy who was in charge of the Philadelphia Eagles when they won the Super Bowl. He was the OC. He's come in, and I think he's been a revelation for Indy. So, yeah, from top to bottom, a very, very good organization right now in the Colts.
Yeah, and I'll say that last night, other than Jadeveon Clowney, who was one of the best in the league at getting to the quarterback, the Titans really didn't generate too much of a pass rush. I believe they only had one sack, maybe, not too many pressures. But yeah, having that offensive line in front of Philip Rivers, who not only is getting up there in age, but even in his prime hasn't been known for being a super mobile quarterback, is a huge plus. And between the offensive line and the defensive line, that's the most important position, in my opinion. You got to be good in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and they definitely have that. And come playoff football, I think that wins you a lot of games. If you can dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, it's really tough to beat a team who can do that come postseason. But not to spend the whole entire night on the Colts here. Another game that jumps out at me, and I know it involves one of the teams that we said, kind of flying under the radar. They're probably a pretty good team, is the Seattle at Rams game. I'm really excited for this one. You're going to have a good quarterback battle. Goff versus Russell, two defenses that definitely aren't, elite. I don't know. The Rams got to rank higher than Seattle. Their defense has been really bad, but definitely not two elite defenses. It should be kind of, an offensive slugfest and, really big game in terms of the division and how the playoff seeding works, in a few weeks here.
Yeah, absolutely. The Rams, I still think they're kind of being overlooked. They're still a good team. I think they're 5-3 right now, and they're going to come into this game. Obviously it's a divisional game. The Rams have had success against Seattle over the years as I've watched them. Even when they weren't very good, they still played the Seahawks very well. Now it's going to be an interesting quarterback matchup because, like you mentioned, Russell Wilson, I think a few weeks ago he was the MVP frontrunner. He's kind of been struggling lately. So you have to think he's going to have a bounce-back game. And Jared Goff, we talked about him about a month ago. I was praising the hell out of Jared Goff because I had to eat my crow. I was kind of criticizing him a lot last season, saying, he's overrated. Sean McVay was the reason he was successful. And, I got to give him props. He really rebounded the first month of the season. That said, he has thrown 4 interceptions in the past 4 games. And, that's a big cause of concern. You can't keep turning the ball over. But I still think he's a very good quarterback. It's going to be a good matchup. 2 good teams. When I look at it, and I think you mentioned it, Seattle's defense is just so bad. And that's got to be a big cause for concern. Giving up so many yards per play. I still got it up, I think. I still got it up. They're giving up, hang on, let me give a second. Yeah, they're giving up 6.2 yards per play. If I can just look real quick for the Rams, the Rams are actually number 1. The Rams are only giving up 4.7 yards per play. So
Yeah,
that's it.
Not to interrupt, but I do know that one argument people will make is, Kansas City won it last year and their defense wasn't all that great. I will say, though, the one difference that I see is that, Kansas City defense, and even this year, has a lot of big-time, playmakers on the defense. A lot of, household names, a lot of guys who can come up big and make a play when you need it most. And looking at Seattle's defense, there really isn't a whole lot of them on that side of the ball that you're like, hey, look, if we need to stop, this guy's going to come out and produce for us. So I think that, there is some similarity there, but you got to keep that in mind. Dave saying that Rams defense is a difference maker. Yeah, for sure. Aaron Donald has been huge again this season because we've gotten so used to him being good every single season. I think that he's been, flying under the radar just like the Rams team. So definitely.
Yeah, man, dude, Aaron Donald's just a freaking tank. I don't know what else you can say, man. I knew he was a good player, but the past 2 or 3 years, man, he's just taken it up to another level. The fact we had a debate about a guy who largely plays on the interior offensive or defensive line could potentially break the sack record. Nah, I mean, dude's just a freaking, steam train coming through your offensive line. And I agree with David there. I think the Rams defense is the difference in this game because the Seattle's defense is so bad. I really don't understand it because I think they have individual good players. Jamal Adams, Bobby Wagner, probably the best linebacker in NFL. If he's not, he's very close. And you mentioned the Chiefs. I think this brings up a good link. I think maybe trading a guy like Frank Clark, maybe that really made a difference on their defense. Are they getting a lot of pressure on the quarterbacks? Probably not if their defense is so bad. So maybe trading Frank Clark was the difference. And I agree with your point there. I don't think you have to have an elite defense anymore to win the Super Bowl. Kansas City didn't have a great defense last year, but I think they had enough to where they were respectable defense and they can make timely stops. They still had really good players like Tyrann Mathieu. They traded for Frank Clark. They still have individual talents that can make plays when they need to, and we saw it. In that Super Bowl, they went down early, but when they needed the stops, they got them. When I look at a team like – go ahead.
Even that whole postseason run, I mean, they got down early to the Texans. That comeback wasn't all on the offense. They had to get defensive stops. And even same, with the Titans. They had to stop that offense to get themselves back in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the league is so offensively driven now. If you have an elite offense, which, a lot of teams are starting to get there now with so much talent, you don't need, a defense that's like the, Legion of Boom or the Denver Broncos when they had all those corners. You don't need that. You just need a defense that can make, opportune stops. And can Seattle do that? I don't know because their defense is so bad. It has been brought up a lot, and it's very odd to say Seattle and bad defense in the same sentence because that's what they've been built on for a long time. But when Richard Sherman got hurt, when they lost, Chancellor and Thomas, all those guys, it's just really regressed. And you got to feel for Bobby Wagner because dude's an absolute beast, but there's not a lot around him. There's really not.
Yeah, we're going to have to see, especially come playoffs, should they make it, which I feel they will. Is this defense going to ultimately cost the Seahawks? I feel like, Russell Wilson, as great as he is, it's very much like Aaron Rodgers, where there isn't so much around him that if he has an off game, the rest of the team can make up for it. Um, but one other game here on our NFL slate before I have to get off here shortly because I have to work, unfortunately. It sucks, but it is what it is. We have the Chargers taking on the Dolphins. My guy Justin Herbert is going to have his first game with Tua. Two rookie guys who Tua was phenomenal last week. Two rookie quarterbacks are going to be going at it. Justin Herbert, my biggest thing with him and the Chargers is he's been playing phenomenal, but man, we got to give him some offensive line help. I mean, the kid's 67% completion rate, 2,146 passing yards, 17 touchdowns. He's been lighting it up, and we can't get the kid wins, and it sucks. We got to invest in the line moving forward, but this should be a pretty fun game to watch, Noah.
Absolutely, and you love to see it. As a neutral, you root for your team, but when you're looking around the league, me personally especially, you like to see these young guys come in and make an impact. And I think that's what you're seeing. Justin Herbert, we've talked about it a lot. The team is just completely failing him right now. Another heartbreaking loss. How many is this poor kid going to have in that team? You got to fire Anthony Lynn. I think, he's probably a good coach, but I think he's started to implement a culture there that's not very good. I think the players that get up, and then once the team starts to fight back against them, they kind of fold there. It's very unfortunate for Herbert. I love Herbert a lot. He's a really good player. Comes from Oregon, so I've always kind of supported him. I think he works hard at his craft. Coming out of his junior season, thought he was a bit of an overrated prospect because he had a big arm, but he missed a lot of passes. The development he made coming into senior season was impressive, so I'm really happy to see him succeed. Tua, he's come in, he's been good. Last week, very good. And I've talked about it a lot. Brian Flores, absolutely love him as a coach. The Dolphins 5-3 on the season. They're 10-7 to when they started to go on a run last year in Week 9, and they have a top 10 pick that they got from the Texans. That rebuild is looking very good there. I think it's going to be a very tough game for you guys because, like you mentioned, it's not been very easy for you guys this season. You guys are what is it 0-6 in one possession games?
Yeah, every game that we've lost this season has only been a one possession game.
Yeah, so I mean that's absolutely unbelievable, and it's got to be debilitating to the morale, to the culture. Yeah, I could definitely relate to it. Obviously, as a Falcons fan, it does not feel good. I do know the feeling there. But yeah, Miami, very good up and coming team. I made the bold prediction before the season that I think that they can win a Super Bowl in the next 5 seasons. Obviously, that's going to take time to see, but I think that rebuild is doing very well. And it's not going to be an easy game for you guys. That said, you guys have had a lot of close games. I could potentially see you winning this game because Justin Herbert, probably the leading rookie of the year. Unfortunately, my guy Clyde, he hasn't really been used a lot in the recent games, so I think Herbert started to pull away there. But it's gonna be a very good game. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned there real quickly with Justin Herbert is, surprisingly to me, because I have a lot of bias towards Herbert being a Charger, of course, but in the the media, ESPN, all these talking heads for professional football, Herbert is getting a lot of love from the media. They all have him as the favorite. The midseason polls came out from ESPN this week. They all have him winning Offensive Rookie of the Year, which shocks me because him and Joe Burrow are having very similar season. Joe Burrow deserves a lot of respect. He's been phenomenal as well. But it shocks me to, a very large majority are going with Herbert, at least right now. With that said, and this game specifically, Dave says that the Dolphins defense has looked really good. I agree. And I didn't think that at this point in the season, I would be saying to myself that, hey, one, Justin Herbert is the starting quarterback and he's performed very well. But two, that he's performed so well that he is good enough to go in there and win this game for us. That I didn't see that coming at all. I thought it would take him a little bit to adjust to the NFL. But yeah, definitely a game that we can win. I feel like our record's very deceiving. I feel like we can compete with just about anybody in the league. It's just a matter of fact, if we can win it at the end. Because last week, we had first of all, we gave up a lead yet again. Secondly, at the end, we still had a chance to win, and one of my favorite guys, Mike Williams, drops that pass. That would have sealed the game for us. We got to get Lynn out. I feel like he's lost control of the locker room. Desmond King going to the Titans for almost nothing really showed that to me. That was kind of like the icing on the cake this season. And he's played really good for the Titans so far. Our thoughts with that was, hey, we got Chris Harris in the offseason, but he's not very young. He's not going to be playing for us for another 5 or 6 seasons, especially at an elite level. And I think that he was fighting with the coaching staff over playing time because he wasn't really getting out there often. And just the fact that I think that the Chargers also thought he might want a lot of money when his contract's up. But, that is what it is. You got to get Lynn out of there. You got to invest in the O-line. I know we went after Bulaga and Trey Turner, which Trey Turner is still young. And this is kind of really his first stint with injuries right now. But Bulaga has been great in his career, but he's also been very, very injury prone. We gotta definitely invest in the O-line and I think get Lynn out. But yeah, we could definitely win this game. Will we? I don't know. Probably got to say Miami's going to win this game based on how our seasons went. But man, do I hope we win one. But really, I just hope for a shootout. I want to see Tua and Herbert both put up big numbers and to go down to the wire.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd like to see both these young players just go out and give it their all, have some good games. And you brought up a lot of good points there that I want to touch on. You guys have had all those close losses. The fact they traded Desmond King for, I believe it was a conditional 6th-round pick or just a normal 6th-round pick, that's embarrassing. Desmond King is a good player, and he's still pretty young. He's probably, 25 right now?
Yeah, this is only, I believe, his 3rd season in the league, maybe 4th.
Yeah, so the fact they traded a guy like that who's still young, who's still good, and with room to grow for basically nothing, that's an absolute joke. And, we mentioned a lot. I think Anthony Lynn has really ruined the culture there. I don't think he's a terrible coach or anything like that. He's not like a garbage coach like Dan Quinn, but I think he's lost the team. The culture, it's not very good right now. No one's really confident. And on the other side, I'm really glad David mentioned this. The Dolphins' defense is so good because of a guy like Brian Flores, who has worked on defense his whole career, basically. And he comes from the New England system, which is something that's very important to mention. He was the safety coach for them from 2012 to 2015, and then the linebackers coach from 2016 2018. This is a guy that knows about defense, that learned from the greatest coach of all time in Bill Belichick. Brian Flores is an excellent coach. And when you look at this game, I think you see 2 completely different cultures. You've got one culture that's terrible, that's a losing culture. None of the players, they have talent, but once a team starts to fight back against them, they fold because they don't have a coach that can lead them. And then the other side, you have this young up-and-coming Miami Dolphins team that last season everyone's saying could potentially be the worst team in NFL history, getting a ton of disrespect. Brian Flores comes in, he completely changes the culture, completely changes. Tua comes in. This is a team that is young, that is exciting, that is fighting. They're pushing their team to the limit, I think. So you have one terrible culture, one culture that's fighting for everything they can give. And, I agree. Herbert, he's a very good quarterback. They need to get him some more weapons as well. Brian Bulaga, I think he's a good player. I think Trey Turner is a good player as well. But those aren't guys you're going to have in your line for a long period of time. They need to go into the draft. They need to continue building around Herbert. And they need to fire Anthony Lynn and get someone else in there to change that culture, like a Brian Flores has done to Miami. Because I agree, they've shown they're not a garbage team. They're not a garbage team at all. They're not a 2-6 team for sure. That record is misleading. They need to change it because Herbert is a good quarterback, and you want to those good quarterbacks aren't as common as you might think. And the fact Herbert has been the leading offensive rookie of the year candidate has been a bit of a surprise. I still think Joe Burrow will probably be the best quarterback from the class, maybe the best career. But Herbert has had the best season. He will probably be Offensive Rookie of the Year. Get this man some help. He deserves it.
Yeah, most definitely. And I want to touch on Dave's comment real quickly myself. Um, watching the season progress at the start of the season, we're actually running the ball really good. And everybody was like, hey, look, the Chargers finally got a run game. Then Austin Eckler went down. We had some injuries to the offensive line. Offensive line play started becoming, really bad. And then we noticed that, hey, this Justin Herbert kid's really throwing the rock around. He's spreading the ball around. He's making the really tough throws. He's making throws under, duress and pressure. And he's progressing through his reads fairly well. So, we don't really need to run the ball. And we've kind of shifted from a balanced offense to more of a pass heavy. And instead of running the ball, these short checkdowns to the running back or running screenplays. So we haven't really tried to, run the ball. And I don't think yes, it would definitely help to have a guy like Darren Henry or Dalvin Cook, but at the same time, I don't think it's completely on the running back position. I think that it's a majority of offensive line and a little bit of not having elite talent at running back. Joshua Kelly, the rookie, I really liked what I've seen out of him so far this season. Justin Jackson's had his moments. Austin Eckler, phenomenal. My unbiased opinion, I don't think that he's a true number one running back who's going to pound it between the tackles for 20 carries a game. But I do think that you complement him with one or two other guys who are pretty well, who can come in on the third shorts and pound the rock. He's really good in that situation, and one of the best receiving backs in the league. So I think that ultimately it's got to start and end at the offensive line. You got to get a group of guys in there who's gonna win the battles in the trenches, going to push your offense up and down the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And David brings up a good point there. I think with a guy like Austin Eckler, like you mentioned, I think he is a good running back. I'm not sure if he's a lead back. I think he would work great in a system like the Saints ran in 2017 when Alvin Kamara was a rookie. You get a guy like Mark Ingram in there as well. You can have a lead back who carries most of the rushing responsibility. And a guy like Austin Eckler will shine in that system. Make no mistake. It'll probably even improve his play because he can catch all the passes out of the backfield. He doesn't have to, get a big load running the ball, but when he does carry the ball, he'll be effective. And then you obviously get a big bruising back who can carry most load running it. And, I know you weren't a fan of how he left, but I'm starting to think they might miss Melvin Gordon there because say what you want about Melvin Gordon, but he was a guy, he can carry it 25, 30 times a game, no problem.
Yeah, and ironically, no, I was going to touch on him. I was going to say that he actually, kind of throwing some shade at him for how he left us and what he said about us. But man, has he not had a good year in Denver? I don't really know if it's, maybe he's not 100% healthy. Maybe he's not really adjusting to their system quite yet. But, definitely as a Chargers fan, it doesn't make you miss him, even though, like you said, he was a really big contributor when healthy to our offense. But at the same time, he wanted top dollar. And we offered him fairly high, and he turned it down for less money to go to Denver and then, kind of talk smack about us. So it is what it is, but I'm glad that he's not, nothing against him. I'm glad he's not lighting it up week in, week out with the Broncos.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's just, it's a very young team. Austin Eckler's only been in the league for a few years. Josh Kelly's a rookie, like you mentioned. I do like him, but are they missing that veteran presence? Who knows? Like you mentioned, the way he left wasn't very good, and he's not exactly lighting it up. But are they missing that type of lead back who can carry the load? Possibly, because Austin Eckler, I don't think is that guy. Can you expect a rookie to do that behind that type of offensive line? Probably not. Especially because I don't think Josh Kelly. I don't know exactly where he was drafted, but I know he wasn't a top prospect. Like a Jonathan Taylor that people expected to come in and carry a load like that. And I think he's exceeded expectations. So yeah, no, I agree with you completely. They got to fix the offensive line not only to help their quarterback set up the running game because, like you mentioned, with a team like the Titans, the running game helps your offense so much. Obviously, it helps you stay balanced, but the play action is so deadly if you can set it up, especially with deep shots off play action. That's where most of your offense can come from. So they got to
Yeah,
get more consistent.
you mentioned Jonathan Taylor there. That's a perfect example. There's a guy who was expected to go high in the draft, was phenomenal in college, 3 or 4 year starter, and has one of the best offensive lines, if not the best offensive line in the NFL. And he's still not going out there every week, and rushing for over 100 yards. He's been solid, but he hasn't been elite by any means. And like you said, you can't expect a guy like Joshua Kelly to do anywhere near that when the line is one of the worst in the league. So yeah, definitely, my biggest takeaways for this season as a Chargers fan is you got to get Lynn out. I don't know who we're going to get in there. At this point, I'd welcome anybody over Lynn. I think he's lost total control of the locker room. The culture's got out from under him, and you got to invest in the O-line, definitely in the draft and potentially in the offseason. We do have a few good linemen, but Pouncey's up there in age. He's no spring chicken. Bulaga, like we said, he's up there in age, even though he's been phenomenal, very injury prone. Trey Turner is probably the only guy on the offensive line who is younger, who has been really good. And that's not enough. We got to get more guys in there.
Absolutely, and like we mentioned with the Colts, this is where a lot of this can make you break your teams, your offensive line. If the Chargers had a guy like a Quentin Nelson on that, would we be discussing this at all? Probably not. And these guys like Adrian Peterson or Zeke who come in right away and dominate are so rare. So it's really hard to expect a guy like Josh Kelly to do that. I think he's done very well, but that offensive line, they got to fix it. They got to replace Lynn. I'm not sure what kind of coach you want, offensive or defensive or whatever, but they just need something different.
Yeah, I'd like to see somebody more aggressive-minded come in. Definitely not, a conservative coach. I want to see a guy who's going to take the chances, whether it be on the field during the game or, making some off-season moves or some trades before trade deadline. I think that, and even in the past when we've had very good teams, I feel like one thing that the Chargers have always lacked is very, physical mindset. Like, hey, we're going to come out and we're going to beat you down for 4 quarters on both sides of the ball. I don't think that we've ever really had that. Even with Marty and at coach and LT and Prime Gates and Rivers, we were still kind of that West Coast sling the ball around, had good defense, but we weren't elite. We didn't come out there, and hit hard every down, and really bring the fight to you. So I think that's what we got to get in there, and the type of coach that I want to see come in.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Chargers, their team I've always seen that has hey, I mentioned this to Garth, he didn't really like it, but yeah, you can fire Lynn and get Quinn. You can do that.
I will say, honestly, no, I definitely don't want him as head coach. But another guy who's on the hot seat right now is Gus Bradley as DC, as we've had a second straight year of struggling on defense. I probably wouldn't be opposed to Dan Quinn coming in as just a defensive coordinator.
I mean, maybe we'll see. He did have the defensive coordinator responsibilities for us, so I'd be a little concerned about that. But who knows? Maybe not having those extra responsibilities will help. But no, going back a bit, the Chargers, they've always had these elite individual players, but I think as a team they've had some holes. You have to look at the organization. I think Dean Spanos, we mentioned this. I think he's a disgrace. I think it's insulting what he's done to the Chargers fan base, what he's done in the organization, and the fans deserve better. And honestly, I think he's disgracing his father's name and everything that he built. Anthony Lynn is not a good coach. The Chargers fired Marty Schottenheimer after he went 14-2 in 2006. What are you going to do? You fire a coach like that, but you're going to keep Anthony Lynn? He wasn't good last year. He hasn't been good this year. What's it going to take?
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, you could definitely make the argument for Lynn if he was having a really good season this year, but between last year, with Phillip Rivers, and I think that Rivers got a lot of blame for last season, rightfully so. He definitely didn't play up to his usual standard. But at the same time, every single game wasn't solely on him. Now this year you got Justin Herbert absolutely balling out beyond expectations. The quarterback's not costing you games this season, and Lynn's still not getting the job done. So definitely, I don't see, unless we win out the rest of the season, I don't see how Lynn doesn't get fired.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think, last season a lot of it did go in Rivers, and like you said, I thought it was well deserved. And they do deserve better, absolutely. Garth deserves better. They all deserve better. It's insulting. But the shift from blame, and I can kind of relate to this as well. It goes to the coach when you have an off season and then the off season becomes a trend. In 2018, the Falcons weren't good. I chalk that up to us missing a lot of key defensive players. But then the next year, when we didn't have that excuse and we still sucked, it kind of goes to the coaching. The Chargers have a lot of really good players. Herbert is balling out. Rivers struggled last season. A lot of it got put on him. Well, this season, Herbert's been great, and they still suck. They have a lot of good players on both sides of the ball. Where does the blame go? I believe it goes on the coaching. I think
Yeah,
it goes on the
I mean, when you have so much, a lot of times when teams are bad, it's just a lack of talent. You have a one or two good guys here and there. But when you have this much talent on a roster, yes, we've had some injuries, but there's still so much talent on that team to be performing this bad. And more so than everything else, the fact that you keep one blowing leads and then two also losing the game, that's just got to be a huge red flag. Hey, we got to get this guy out of there and get somebody new in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously the fact you got to put some blame on the players. The fact they're 0-6 in those one possession games isn't good. But that's what coaching is for. That's what all those expensive coaches and on the sideline are for. The fact they're blowing all those leads is on them. That's their job to be able to coach those players to keep the lead. And when you look at the Chargers, I don't really blame the players. I blame Anthony Lynn and I blame Dean Spanos because I think Spanos is completely incompetent at his job, and he's a disgrace to his father's legacy. And Anthony Lynn has lost it.
Yeah, and I think that there's also some blame to go on Tom Telesco. Despite, I will say that he is an absolutely phenomenal drafter. He always seems to not only get somebody good early in the draft, but we have late round draft picks that end up being really great for us. Like Desmond King was one of them. Um, but as far as coaching decisions, making offseason moves, this was like the first offseason it felt like forever that we even went after anybody of somewhat of a big name, and making trades. The guy like never makes trades. Um, so I think definitely some blame goes there. But we've been on for a while now tonight, Noah, and I could go all night. Honestly, I could rant about Anthony Lynn all night. Fortunately, I do kind of got to wrap things up here. I got to work first thing in the morning, as always. Saturdays, it sucks. It is what it is. But I just want to say thank you, Noah, for being on here tonight with me. Huge shout out to Dave. He just put this comment through a few moments ago. Glad to have you here, as always. Glad to have all you guys here tuned in tonight. I feel like every week this is getting more and more comfortable for me and Noah. We're putting on a better show. As you can see, it seems like every week we're getting a little bit longer. So I think that talking about stuff, changing topics, really diving into things is becoming easier and easier for us each week. And thank you for coming on with me as always, Noah.
Oh yeah, man. I loved it as usual. It's a lot of fun with you. My voice is starting to go as well, so I'm kind of glad we're wrapping up. But I think this is the longest we've gone. I think we break records like every week just because we start getting into it. The interaction, David mentioned it there. It's just a lot of fun, and we're improving every week. And I'm glad everyone is starting to really enjoy it because we are as well. The interaction, it's just so fun to do. Got to thank Brian for giving us this opportunity to come on. The Sports Box guys, got to give them a big shout out. Our boys at Sport Life Uncensored who have supported us from the start. Would we be doing this without them? No, we wouldn't. So big shout out to all of them. But yeah, Garth, man, love doing this every week. I wish you could get like a Saturday off one day so we could do like a 3-hour special with guests and stuff like that. But until then, we're just going to keep doing our thing, improving every week, surpassing our limits like an anime pro tag. And, let's keep doing this, man. Let's make this into something really good.
Yeah, most definitely. And just before we do wrap it up here, I do want to say that, for all of you guys that have tuned in, especially for our Sports Life guys, we appreciate you guys as always joining in. But I want to say that we aren't the only show here on the Sports Box. I highly recommend tuning into Brian and Mike on Monday nights, Highly Opinionated Show. They put on a phenomenal show. I'm glad that they got us in here and give us this opportunity, and also, big motivation, at least for me personally, to even give this a shot. So definitely check them out. Check out all the other shows. There's always something going on every night of the week. So, if you're just at home kind of hanging out after work or whatever's going on, don't forget that we're not the only ones on here.
Absolutely, man. They do a really good job. It's surreal, you go from watching these guys to actually being part of the team. It is pretty crazy, but yeah. Big ups to Sportsbox, all the guys on there, really fantastic. Big ups to Sport Life. Big ups to Garth Michael Patrick, my man, the co-host. It's just a lot of fun to do, and I look forward to it every week.
Most definitely, man. We look forward to seeing everybody again next Friday night. As I said already, thank you, Noah, for joining me. Hope everybody has a good night. Have a good weekend. Don't forget to watch some football. And if you care at all, watch the Masters. Hopefully Tiger can pull or at least be in it by the end of the weekend. All right, guys. Have a good weekend.
Peace.
Thank you for watching the Sports Box. Follow us on Facebook at Sports Box Show, Twitter at Sports Box Show, Instagram at The Sports Box Show. Find us on YouTube and join Outside the Box, our Facebook sports discussion group. The Sports Box is brought to you by our friends at CrowdPlay. Download the free CrowdPlay app today and use promo code THEBOX at sign up for 10 points. See you next time.